Hey, everybody, welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, studentministryconversations.org. There you can find all of our episodes, our show notes, blog articles, and then also the new stuff that we've added to the shop. So you can support us by purchasing some merch from us as well. And anything that you purchase from us, hopefully you like it, but then also it supports us in the process of hopefully turning this podcast into something even better. And so I am sitting down with Melissa and David today, and we're kind of starting over the past couple episodes. We've been mentioning this, but one of the things that we're starting that's going to be a different thing for the next season coming. This is episode 199. One of the things that's coming up is the fact that we are going to kind of move away from guest episodes on every single week. We are still going to have them, but we are not going to fully rely on booking of guests to keep this podcast going, because we're going to be honest, it got really, really hard. It was really, really hard to connect with enough people. It was really, really hard to find scheduling that worked so we could get an episode out each week. And so we are going to have conversations, but then also with those conversations, we aim on still providing guest episodes that will maybe particularly have insight on the topics that we've been talking about. And so we're going to be doing that. But for the next couple weeks, we are going to be continuing with just the idea where we do a roundtable discussion. And our topic for today, episode 199, is the first half of this topic, and it is going to be talking about failure or mistakes. And so with this, we're going to do this episode and episode 200, and we're going to talk about mistakes from two different vantage points. And today we're talking about how to handle mistakes that are done by students within your ministry. And so I feel like this is something that we all have the same common ground on. Every youth pastor has students that make boneheaded choices and bad choices, and we have to sit and help mediate the decision-making process on how these things play out. And so this is going to be the topic today. But first off, I don't know where I want to go with this.
But how did this come up?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
How did this come up, Melissa?
So Wednesday, I had a meeting at the university, and one of our church members had texted me, "Hey, please call me." And so I'm looking down at my phone. Here's my phone. Looking down at my phone, trying to hit the buttons to make phone calls work. And I was not paying attention where I was walking in the hallway. And, our lovely AED, the defibrillator machines most of us have in our churches. Well, we have them at school too. That makes sense. They're in metal boxes on the wall. And it just grabbed me. No, I just ran smack dab into it. And I have a bloody, bruised head, which then I collapsed on the floor, and the professor saw me and called 911. It was a whole thing. The ambulance came, but he's talking to 911, and he says they want to talk to you. He hands the phone to me, and they said, "How are you, ma'am?" And I said, "I'm okay," and I'm trying not to cry, and I'm holding my head. And they said, "How old are you?" And I told them, crying more because that was stupider. And then I said, "Taylor?" And she said, "I thought that was you." Well, yeah, we live in a really small town, but this particular 911 dispatcher was in my youth group when she was in youth. So that was like, oh, yay. And so then I had to tell her the stupid thing that I did of running into this box. It's not like someone pushed me. I just did this all on my own. And so I started this conversation in my own head about things that she's done. Like, hey, you can't talk. I've been with you while you did stupid things in your life, which I won't bring up for reasons of confidentiality. But, and she's a grown person now, and she's an adult, and sometimes we have to let that go. But it did start making me think about how do we react when our students make stupid decisions like running their head into a wall. And how does that not only how do we react, but how does that affect them as people? And so,
yeah.
So here's how I did start this out. So I asked Taylor, I said, what do you get trained to do when people call you on the phone and tell you that they have done something stupid when they call 911? And And so, because she was very calm and she like told me to stay sitting down and she didn't call me stupid, she said, during training, we're told to remain professional and ask questions like we would for any other call, no matter how stupid the behavior. We're also told that some things may be silly to them, like they may be funny, because I would probably laugh at this. And she said, but it could be like the biggest deal for that person. And so that we have to give them grace. So I thought that was really cool that that's what they are trained to do as a 911 operator. So that's our
Yeah.
question to y'all. What do you do when a student tells you that they've done something stupid?
I mean, that doesn't translate at all.
Right.
Um, yeah, so that's a great question. Like how do we remain professional, especially on those situations? And I think that's where we can take it this conversation first is like and maybe David, you can open this up, but like how do we handle those conversations? And I think a lot of times this happens in conversations, and I'm not going to share names, but I did my first youth ministry. I had a lock-in where basically I had a couple kids bring their video game consoles up to the church for the night, and we played video games and goofed off and had a good time, all this stuff. And the next day I get a call from a middle school boy and I didn't get to answer it, and so I checked the voicemail and he was like, Brent, this is blank, I need you to call me, this is a life and death emergency now. And I'm like, what happened? And so I call him, and he forgot his connector cables at the church for his Xbox console, and he needed to schedule a time where he could come back up and get them. And I was like,
that's not life or death. Yeah.
Yeah, not life or death. Definitely was like, I could handle this in a different way. I'm gonna say, man, I'll meet you up at the church here in a little bit. But David, how can we handle those situations?
Story time with David. I feel like the best way to do that is to explain a situation. So when I was in youth ministry in Canyon, and this is one of my favorite stories because of just how ridiculous it was. I had also a lock-in, so um, maybe that's like the subtopic here is that
Don't you lock
stupid
in?
things happen at lock-ins. but but yeah, we had a lock-in, and we had two students who thought it would be a good idea to basically set up a whole like full on like WWE wrestling thing. And I don't know a lot about it, but anyway, so they were pulling out tables and chairs to set up for the dinner party. So they were there actually like helping before we got all totally set up. And anyway, they're setting out the tables and they get this idea. They're like, wouldn't it be hilarious if we took turns slamming each other into the table? And so obviously, you know, we know where this story is going. So literally slams them through this big, thick wooden table. And of course, kid is like hurting the whole thing. And I'm, and you know, they come up to me very freaked out. They know they're in trouble. They're freaked, you know, the whole thing. And so, you know, I just look at them like, what were you guys thinking? And they're like, I didn't think the table would break. And I was like, what did you think was going to happen when you slam through somebody through a table? It's literally in the definition. Like you're slamming somebody through a table. They're like, yeah, but in wrestling, like they like crack the table underneath so it's easier to break through so you don't actually hurt somebody. I was like, okay, solid logic. Is this WE? They're like, well, no. I was like, what is this? And they're like, First Methodist Canyon. I was like, do you think that we pre-crack the tables for you? No, they're meant to be eaten on and play board games, not slamming each other through a table. And so I just remember thinking, like, what were you thinking? And that's really what I kept thinking was like, what were you thinking? And you know, the whole thing. And it was hard too because I think at the time I was like maybe 19 years old, and like there's a part of me as a guy, and Brent can maybe attest to this. Actually, I know he can because I've heard your stories of when you were in youth. But there was a small part of me that goes, that was awesome, and I shouldn't have felt that way, but I did. And so, but I was like, okay, you have to be an adult. You're 19 years old. You have to be an adult. And
barely an
Anyway,
adult at
I
that
was like
point.
barely an adult, but when you're 19, you're big cheese now. And so I was like, okay, I got to be an adult here. And I'm like, okay, so y'all know you have to replace the table, right? And they're like, well, how are we going to do that? And I was like, figure it out. We're going to talk to your parents and we're going to make sure they know what's going on. And of course, I had already double checked and made sure they were cool. Like they were laughing, they were fine, no back injuries or anything like that. But I was like, okay, you have to figure out how you're going to replace the table. So if I were you, both of y'all go get a part-time job and pay your parents back. That's really the best thing to do here.
Mm-hmm.
And they went back and forth. Well, it was his idea. He should have to pay for it. I was like, you both did it. You're both paying. Deal with it. Now go call your mom.
So he sounds like you found a solution to the problem. So let me ask you real fast. What kind of voice did you have? Did you have like, are you okay? Man, that was dumb. Or were you angry? Like, did you yell at them?
I didn't.
That's good.
My first response was, "Are you okay?"
Mm-hmm.
And legitimately, I mean, someone could get really hurt being slammed through a table, like legitimately. So I needed to make sure they were okay first, and then from there, it was a mixture of seriously. So I guess it was like a mixture of sarcasm, anger, and laughter because I really was trying not to laugh.
Right.
So I feel like now I'd like to think that I would be more graceful, but as a dad, and you guys know my kid, I think I would go into the parent mode. Unfortunately, I'd like to think I'd be always grace first, but I think as I've gotten older, I'm like, okay, that was crazy, that was stupid, you shouldn't have done that, and like almost judge you with it. Like I don't know.
Okay, so
I
I have a
usually am
question
graceful,
about that. But then did you give them consequences other than the
yes.
fixing the table? Like did you have any other consequences?
I At the time, no.
Mm-hmm.
I probably would now. Back then, it was more of a they were there serving.
Mm-hmm.
Did they do something stupid? Yeah, but they were there serving. It's not like they were just jacking around while we were like in the middle of worship or something. Like they showed up early before, like several hours before the lock-in to help me set up, and so for me there was a level of, okay, that wasn't the smartest decision,
Mm-hmm.
but you're still here, sacrificing your time. And so to me it was a little bit moot,
Yeah,
but
like they'd already had a consequence kind of thing backwards.
yeah, I was like, as long as you pay for the table,
Mm-hmm.
have that conversation with your parents, because let's be honest, whatever consequences I give you, your parents are so ticked off right now
Yeah.
that and embarrassed. Like
Mm-hmm.
whatever I give you is not going to be on the same level as mom.
Yeah.
Mom is mad. Mom is on leadership at this church. She's mad.
Yeah.
So
So I've noticed I don't yell at my youth students, and I don't think I ever have. There's a lot more grace, but I noticed I was yelling way more at my own kids at home for doing stupid things, that
yeah,
angry yelling. And then
absolutely.
I don't know, there's probably some Holy Spirit, I don't know, happening. But I started thinking about it and like, why I'm not yelling at those kids for doing the exact same thing that I'm yelling my own kid. And so I've stopped yelling at my own kid because of that. So I think that's so funny that it's the opposite way
Yeah,
That's
around.
cool.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, that's a really cool
I
yeah.
revelation.
Yeah, I think so. With that though, I mean, I think that there has to be some tangibles that come into play regardless of the choice,
Yeah,
whether it was a broken table or whether it was a really, really urgent phone call that wasn't urgent at all, or whether it's something serious like you
yeah,
have a kid that gets convicted of a crime,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
because I've
yeah.
had plenty of those in my youth ministry career as well.
Hmm.
And so with that, I think one of the things that has to kind of be in play is first and foremost, your reaction is everything.
Yes.
Yeah,
And this almost goes into the play of just like we all have had the time or season of our lives where we have really, really young kids, and that is one of the first things you learn as a parent is your reaction is everything, especially when they get into that toddler
And they
phase
fall.
hmm,
where they're jumping off of stuff and doing
yeah.
all kinds of crazy monkey antics. And it's one of those things where they immediately look at you
If you're freaked out,
and
they're
they're
like,
like,
Mm-hmm.
what are you going to do? And if you're like, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it, just get up, they're fine. And I think a lot of that goes back into how we handle ourselves when these situations arise as well. Because it might not necessarily be that kid looking at you, but especially if it's like what David said, where there's a couple kids up there, maybe it's a group of 5, maybe it's a group of 7 that are helping set up, but only 2 actually did it. Those other 5 are watching you like a hawk
Mm-hmm.
because they're like, oh, he's in trouble.
And I think
What's David gonna
there's
do?
even a part in the back of their head that goes, I didn't stop it. Am I in trouble too?
That's true.
like,
Yeah.
like, you know, I certainly would have felt that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As a teenager, for
Well,
sure.
and especially that cringe of awkwardness when someone else gets yelled at, when you're just kind of, especially when you're teenagers and you're standing around and you just want to leave. And so then you're not in a safe place anymore. And so I think that's important with church. I had one that she comes up to me and she said, I need some community service hours. And I said, okay, we can make that happen. What happened? Like, why do you need community service hours? Because this is a student that was probably not needing for National Honor Society. We've met. And she said, oh, I got into a car accident and they said it was my fault. So the judge said I need community service hours. And I said, oh, are you okay? And she said, yeah, my brother was in the car too and he hit the windshield. And so we're just having this lovely conversation, very calm. And then I went, you're 14. And she said, yeah, that's why I got a ticket. I said, you don't have a license. And she goes, that's why I got a ticket. Duh. Like there was just, she's just like, I know, like, no, this is a bigger deal than you're telling me. If you were 16 and got in a car accident, that would be one thing. You're 14, don't have a license. Why were you driving with your younger brother in the car? There are more conversations to be had. And so we did have the conversation about like, you shouldn't do that again. Like that seems like a bad choice. Like you should wait till you're old enough with a license. So she left something in my car and I dropped it off after church and I see her getting into the driver's seat of the car in the driveway when I pulled up and she saw me and she screamed and ran back in the house. Like she said, you got me. And I'm like, we just talked about this. So there's that one thing, like, yes, she needed help. And so we needed to figure out a solution to the actual legal problem. But in me getting onto her, I wasn't yelling in anger, but I was more of that disappointed kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
Because she needed to know someone was concerned and cared about her behavior. Because sometimes that's not what's happening at home. And when students know that they have someone that will be disappointed in them, then that affects their behavior sometimes when they're like, oh, I shouldn't do that. Like, I know that that's wrong because Miss Melissa told me that that was wrong. So I think that's important. But me getting angry about it, that wouldn't have done anything. Like she just would have not come back to church. Like,
So
it immediately puts their walls up.
Yes.
I think that brings up a good question, though, Melissa. Obviously, there's a line of accountability and a line of grace. How do you balance that act?
Of grace and accountability? Well, the good news was she hadn't done the thing to me, and she'd already been in trouble with the law. So it's not like I knew something and then, do I report it or not? Like that's always a big question of, when we find out our youth are doing illegal activities. But this one she'd already been not arrested, but taken to a judge. And so that part, there wasn't, she wasn't driving a church van. Like there was nothing, there was a lot of stuff that wasn't about me in that moment. And so that one was luckily a big grace situation. So I would say.
But it was almost a sense of accountability there too, because you pulled up later and she was getting in the car and she was like, no.
Yeah. And then she didn't drive again because I said, don't do that. And so she hasn't, although there's one thing that I was suspicious. She was the one driving when they ended up somewhere. But at that point I was like, I'm not asking questions anymore. Like what I don't know. So, but yeah, she did look at me and say, she's going to catch me and then she might do something about this. And then she got out of the car. So you're right about the accountability in that point. And then what would I have done if she had gotten in the car while I was standing there and drove off? Would I call the police on that? Like, is that a mandatory reporter situation? I don't like, yeah. So,
That's a good one. And so we've also kind of discussed parents, but more on the aspect of like your parents already know, your parents are already ticked, kind of thing like that. But there are a lot of situations that come into our ministries to where not necessarily the parents know yet.
Right.
And so how or what is the best way to involve parents when a student tells you of a mistake that they've done and you're like, this is more than a small mistake, we have to talk to people? What is the best way to involve parents in helping a student navigate a mistake that they've made?
So glad you asked that question, because I was literally about to bring that up. So I have a policy with our students. When they tell me you know it's a serious thing when they ask you if you can talk, and you could just feel the almost sense of like panic that they're in. And so um and they always start with those little words that we really as youth pastors hate to hear. Can you keep a secret? And of course, one thing I love about our denomination is that um, it's in the rules and everybody knows them, is that we can never keep a secret ever. Like, just assume we have to tell someone, you know? And so I had a student several years ago who came into my office before youth actually, and was like, "Hey, can we talk?" And I was like, "Yeah, what's up?" And I could just see it on her face. And she's like, "Well, I want to talk, but can you promise me you won't tell my mom?" And I looked at her and said, "You know, I can't promise that." And I was like, I was like, "I'm honored that you trust me with this." Like, I think it's always important to show honor in those situations, because they've already messed up. They're fessing up to it.
Mhm.
Being mean about it, or, any of the, it's not going to help the situation. They're half guarded, but they're bringing their guard down in a moment to tell somebody, and that is something that needs to be honored. I think always, even if it's a situation where it's highly scary, like I killed a person, like, that kind of situation. It's like, okay, there is a level of seriousness, but also to a point that can be traumatic for these students. And so I think it was really important to go first off, like, "Hey, I am so honored that you trust me with this, but I also need you to know that I cannot keep a secret from your parents." The only, obviously, if we're talking about a sexual abuse from your parents, there's other protocols,
Mhm.
obviously. But in this situation, she had went too far with her boyfriend. Keep it at that. And so freaking out, she was like, "You cannot tell my mom." And I kept telling her, I was like, "I have to tell her." But I was like, "Here's how we're going to handle this." And she was like, "Well, just please don't tell my mom." And she just kept repeating it over and over and over. And it didn't matter how many times I told her we have to talk to her. And so I said, "Let's do this." I was like, I can tell you this. I will not be the person to tell your mom." And she finally had this like sense of relief. And I said, "You're gonna tell her." And she's like, No, that's not how this is gonna work." And I said, "Here's how it's gonna go. We're gonna wait for we're gonna wait for everybody to go home. And once everybody's home, we will stay right here in my office with your mom, and I will sit with you, and I will help mediate the whole situation, but you are going to tell your mom, and I will make sure that your heart is, I'm not going to let your mom kill you." Basically. And she was like, "I don't know." If I was like, "That's your option. Either I can mediate with you and you can tell your mom, or I can tell your mom and your mom gets to react however she wants, and you have no backup." "Oh, well, I'd rather have backup." I was like, "Okay, great, let's do that." I can tell you it is a top 5 moment in my ministry career. the conversation that happened, it was hard, it was scary, it was nerve-wracking for her specifically, but it was the fact that her mom was given that level of trust. She handled it exactly how I did. She was like, I'm just she didn't use the word honored, she was mad, but she was like, I'm just grateful that I heard it from you and not somebody else, or you're pregnant, or one of those situations, because it was like 3 months before, so like we're clear probably, which it's been 12 years now, so we're clear, but it's one of those
It's a
situations.
really long delivery.
So we're totally clear, but in that moment, I mean, we sat in my office for probably 3 hours, and she just began to, when her mom didn't just eat her alive, she started opening up about a lot of different things. I mean, it was like the floodgates were opened, and she was telling her mom things that she had never trusted her with,
Mhm.
and realized, like, I can say the hard things to my mom, and she's not going to hate me, and she's not going to disown me, and she's not going to kick me out, she's not going to kill me. And that conversation ended up being one of the most beautiful conversations. And then the crazy thing is, I got to officiate her wedding last weekend,
Aw.
and she brought that story up at her wedding with her mom. Like, she had this moment, and it was a really cool thing, and she was like, I remember sitting in David's office having the hardest conversation I've ever had, and you were so loving and so kind, and I hope that I could be half the mother that you are when I become a mother one day. And like,
Very cool.
every eye, like, we're all just bawling, and it was this beautiful moment, and I was just like, and I had forgotten about it until the wedding last weekend, and so it was just a really cool moment
Yeah.
of handling it the proper way. And really comes back to us as youth pastors. Our job is to equip our students to handle the hard conversations,
Mhm.
and to do that, and to own their mistakes. And so in that
Yeah.
moment, I got to walk with both mom and her, and demonstrate what it looks like to say something hard, and to live with the consequences that came with it. And I told her before, I said, listen, there's going to be consequences. You're gonna have to realize that there's going to probably be a grounding at the very
Right.
least. But the
Yeah.
fact that she said something, their relationship got so much closer than it had ever been. And I can't say that every conversation is going to be like that. They're very rarely like that. But at the same time, we get to equip our students and our parents to navigate a really difficult conversation. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of our primary jobs as youth pastors.
Yeah. No, and I think that brings up some good aspects and some good points. And it kind of makes me. This might be the last question. It might be our second to last question. But one of the things that obviously that you kind of laid out there is um, part of our job. Well, part of parents' jobs first is to make their kids feel loved and supported. And one of the things that I voice with my kids all the time is just this mindset of like, I would rather you tell me the bad thing and let us discuss it with you coming up in honesty, other than me finding out and having to address it in other lights. And so
Mhm.
we've had some really interesting conversations. But it's one of those things to where like sometimes those conversations come up, and just like the random questions that really aren't big deals or big serious efforts, sometimes he comes up and he's honest about something, or my oldest is honest about something that he thinks is death.
Yes.
He thinks
Yeah.
we are going to just absolutely like
Disowned.
disown him for. And it's like,
Straight to jail.
why? I and we're almost holding back laughter because it's so innocent and so
Yeah.
like
Yes.
so naive, but it's one of those things. So I guess my question is, how do we, from our perspective, what are some key principles or key just things that we can do in our ministries
Actions.
that allow, or key actions that make sure our students feel loved and supported, and how do we go into those situations to where they know that?
I think it goes back to exactly what I said just a little bit ago, is we have to start by physically stating that there is grace
Hmm.
from the start. It really does tear the walls down, but also being honest and saying, hey, listen, whatever you tell me, I'm gonna have to handle it as appropriately as I can. But just know that I'm honored, I'm grateful that you are willing to share
Right.
share with me. And I think it always has to start with that, with grace and honor, because it does it probably the best term I could come up with is it disarms the situation and takes a little bit of the tension out. It's still a hard thing. Still a scary thing, but if we can start with that, it ultimately comes down to being approachable. Like, I think back to Jesus, like our whole thing is as Christians is to be like Jesus. And I can't help but feel like Jesus was so approachable and continues to be. Like, how many times have we prayed and said, God, I messed up again and I did this thing again. And Jesus is so kind and loving and forgiving. And I think about the story of the prodigal son and, the father bracing. And it's one of those things. It's like Jesus modeled through the parables exactly how we should handle it. And so I think if we take it from a biblical standpoint, we've got to honor and be graceful from the start.
Yeah.
That's
I
step one.
mean, God's grace brings us to repentance.
So you've got the
Yeah.
two do things. I will have the two do not things. And that is anger. There's the only thing your anger is going to do is make them feel guilty. And that's not helpful in the situation, especially when there may be more things they need to tell us. If we shut it down immediately with like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that, then that's you're putting those walls back up, right? And then the second one is to not laugh. If it is something that is, oh my goodness, in my house, we said you're not allowed to date until 16. She had a secret boyfriend. And so she told me, and she thought I was going to just, lose my mind. And mostly I was trying not to laugh because she was so serious and earnest about her failing and her mistake and her sin. Like, it was just a whole bunch. And so when we laugh at them, like, it's going to make them feel stupid. It's going to make them
Yeah.
feel like I shouldn't tell anybody anything. Like, it's really going to limit what they're comfortable sharing. And that's not just with you. It's not with their youth pastor or their pastor. That's with anybody. And so, yeah. And so we need to don't get angry. Don't raise your voice. Big ones right there. Don't throw things, obviously, but like don't get angry, don't raise your voice, and then don't laugh. So we have to kind of come up the same energy they're coming at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're going to spend a minute and then we're going to close down the show. But I think one of the things that we should just kind of cover, just for the sake of, like, we've talked about what you do, but what are some of these mistakes that we've talked about? And so we're just going to lightning round, and we will spend a minute and we will go through different mistakes that we've seen in our ministry where we've had to throw these into action. And then we'll kind of close with that, just the mindset of like, because I think a lot of times we have this mentality, even with the most generic and common things, where we feel like we're the only one that's ever dealt with it.
Yeah.
And so with that, let's just do a rapid fire to kind of close off this episode. And basically, we're just going to be answering a question of what are some of the common mistakes that students make, and then maybe that can gradually grow to some of the bigger ones. But like, just what are some common mistakes that students make that you've had to address and implement these things that we've discussed into action with those things?
Probably starting off so small. Like, this is nitpicky, but I know a lot of people get frustrated about it. Is we hang out for an hour or more, and as soon as it's time to start worship, can I go to the bathroom? And 20 people take off.
Yeah.
And we're like, you just derailed our worship. You know what I mean? And it's one of those things that no matter where I've gone, the adult volunteers get so peeved by it. It's not really a failure, but it's one of those things where it's like, again, teachable moment. Handle your business before it's time to get going. Because once we lock in, no, you can't go to the bathroom. Don't have an accident. But at the end of the day, like, you had an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever. You should have gone before we started.
Sure.
Okay, language, either in the van, they can't hear you.
Yes.
And then, or other way around, we can't hear them. Or when they yell back at me, Like that one's super fun. Like, especially because then you
Okay.
really have to go, don't yell, don't yell, don't yell.
Yeah. I would say breakups or bad relationships
Bro, I was
or
going there too.
and anywhere in that nature, because I feel like a lot of times we feel like we're a revolving door and we just say the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over, and they don't listen and they still do it.
Uh-huh.
But regardless of how many times we tell them not to make a dumb mistake and not make this specific dumb mistake, and we repeat it and then they still do it, we still have to respond with grace.
Yes.
And in that same realm, it's like, great, you're a couple. Boys are blue, girls are pink.
No
Put them
purple.
together, purple. No purple
Mhm.
ever. Like
Yeah.
like we have 2 6th graders that were recently dating, and it was hard because it was nearly adorable. But he would just, they weren't holding hands, but he would put his arm around her, and we're like, bro, remove your arm or I will remove your arm off your socket, bro. Like, stop it right now. But then like I'm talking to both
I don't
sets
feel
of
like
parents.
that's how we're supposed to address these
No, exactly,
situations, David.
exactly. But both sets of parents are also volunteers, and they're like, it's kind of adorable, but seriously, not in church. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Well, Melissa, one more and then let's close it off.
I would say spilling things, breaking things, and throwing things when they're not supposed to be throwing things. For example, off of the balcony into the church during service.
There was a stained glass window there? Oops.
Yeah. They were throwing paper
I wasn't
airplanes.
supposed to throw paper. Literally, same thing. Throwing airplanes in the middle of worship, and they hit an old lady, and I was like, "Bro, you can't tell me that was a good idea."
Yeah.
They all do silly things.
Let's go find your brain because that's obviously not here. Yeah, no, but the point is that we've all seen mistakes. We've all had these different things that we've had to encounter, that we've had to navigate through. And it goes from stuff silly that can still cause some crazy animosity in church from throwing paper airplanes. But then you also get into the mindset of where couples have sex before marriage to where they have criminal offenses happen,
Pregnancies.
where parents are doing things they shouldn't be doing, where they're dealing with emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, all these different things. And the big thing, and I kind of want to finish with this, is just sometimes it's not even their fault and they feel like it is. We still have to be there for those two.
Yeah.
And so regardless of whatever is approached, regardless of whoever comes to talk, you have to approach with a theme and a identity of grace, and you have to approach in humbleness and meekness, just like in any other situation, because we want this to be a beginning of conversations, not a one-off conversation.
Yeah.
And so the way that we respond and the way that we handle ourselves in those conversations basically is a do or die on if those conversations ever happen again. So if you're listening to this and you're new and you haven't had many of these opportunities, I would encourage you to do 3 things. I would encourage you to wait 5 seconds before you respond.
Huge.
I would encourage you to think about what you're going to say before you say it. Even if you have to say, hey, I appreciate you saying what you did, and I appreciate you telling me this. Obviously, like David said and Melissa said, honor the whole I can't be confidential. You can say that up front, but then think about how you would respond. And if you don't have a accurate and correct response right off the bat, I think those come with time and more experience. Especially if you're younger, you might not have a great answer right off the bat on how to handle a situation. It's okay to be like, hey, I appreciate you telling me that. I can't keep this a secret, but before I respond on how I would handle the situation, I need a little bit of time to make sure that I'm giving you a biblical and accurate answer.
Yeah.
So can I text you later, or can I if they're texting you, can we talk about it at youth next week, or hey, can I call you, or can we meet up for coffee tomorrow? Something to that nature to give you adequate space and adequate time to assess and maybe even seek counsel if you don't have a direct answer. And then lastly, pray. and do it like as much as you can. I maybe even pray with them during the conversation, that just words won't be jumbled and that God and his authority is on full display in those conversations. So, but with that being said, that is all the time that we have for this episode. And don't forget, this is part 1 of this conversation. So next week we will be releasing part 2. And part 2 is going to be what happens when the youth pastor makes the mistake, which I don't know about you. I've definitely had a couple.
I thought you were going to say, I've never done that.
Never.
Yeah.
Never.
No, I believe that's one of the other common grounds is we all have oops moments, but how do we handle them in the different lights that could possibly put us in? From the small things to where we might forget to announce something in church, to the big things of maybe we made a mistake that we shouldn't have made, and it was a 100% lack of judgment call. And we have to deal with the repercussions from that too. So that will be our conversation next week. But until next time, we just want y'all to be encouraged and inspired and uplifted by our content. If you have any comments on stuff like this, we would love to hear from you. We love feedback, and quite honestly, just being transparent, we don't get a ton. So if you like an episode, or if you have questions about an episode, or if you want to continue that conversation, find us on social media at Talk Student Men, or email us directly. It's either Brent, David, or Melissa at studentministryconversations.org. You can email us, and we'd love to continue doing conversations with you. You can also find our individual social media handles in the show notes on the website for this episode and all of our episodes. But until next week, we hope that you guys have a great week, and we will see you next time.